On today's episode of Locked On Wild, which John Hynes line blenders are actually worth keeping in the deck as the season unfolds?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we'll get John Hynes' comments after the 2-1 overtime loss against the Chicago Blackhawks and what Hynes was looking for in that game from the Minnesota Wild to finish off the road trip. We'll also take a look at the line blender, see which combinations are actually worth keeping in the back of John Hynes' mind as the season unfolds. And we'll take a look at just where Jonas, Brodin, and Jared Spurgeon stack up with their numbers so far this season. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild since 2021, credentialed media member, and we continue to kind of react to the 2-1 loss in OT to the Chicago Blackhawks. Would have loved to get all six. I was feeling greedy. 6 out of 6 points on the road trip. But at the end of the day, the fact that the Wild in a game that they really didn't have their best stuff, they still find a way to come away with the point. And they get 5 out of 6 on the road trip. And from John Hynes' postgame comments, that's exactly what he was looking for from his team. A lot of travel. You got the back-to-back on the West Coast against the Ducks and the Sharks. So kind of a schedule loss against Chicago, just with having to play 3 games in 4 days. And so let's just get things started by getting John Hynes' comments after that loss to Chicago.
It was a night where the travel, the fatigue was evident in the first 2 periods, yet it looked like your team found a way in the third to really grind something out here.
Yeah, I'm really proud of our guys. I thought, 5 out of 6 points on the road trip, and then coming in this game until we played a heck of a third period. We dug in. We just kept grinding and grinding and grinding. And, that's how you have to find ways to win games, get points in games. And just really proud of the I think the mental toughness and the physical toughness of the guys as the game continued to go on, and then to dig deep and play the style of game that you needed to play in the third period to get yourself in control of the game and put them under duress and find a way to score. We had multiple looks. Bold's got it, but that was that's the team, I think, toughness that we're looking for tonight in tonight's game when we had it.
Did you want to start juggling the lines for a second and then obviously continue to get it on that?
Yeah, just, as you said, I thought that, there wasn't a ton going on in the first 2 periods. And sometimes you just make some tweaks and you see different guys that are going and try combos. It changes, I think, the mojo a little bit on the team and on the bench, and guys are up and moving. And, I think eventually we found it, but it wasn't the line juggling. It was more just the dig in that we had in the third period.
It started there, those last couple of shifts in the second period, and it continued in the third, but you had that huge shift by the fourth line that drove the penalty, and then it just felt like it took over.
Yeah, I thought Huzadinov's line was really good tonight. Obviously, like you said, I thought they had a strong game, but end of the second, third period, those guys I thought they were going to find us one. We did keep that line together, juggled around the other ones, but it's nice. I think their game's really coming. They're impacting the game, and they were difference makers tonight. Although they didn't score, they were different makers in bringing momentum to the team.
Obviously, with 5 minutes left, you have to pull out all the stops. But what made you go with a Boldy, Kaprizov, Zuccarello line that we've never seen probably in ever?
Yeah, you know what? I think in preseason I looked at it a little bit, just quick. I just a little bit of a feel. I thought Boldy was going. Kirill and Zook were away from each other for a little bit, then they're back together, and I thought Boldy had some jam in the third period, and looked like sometimes you just get a feel of different guys, and they were good.
How do you keep things organized? Like you pretty much went with consistent lines in the third group. The second line, it was like the second period you had probably 8 shifts in a row, where it was just different guys on every line.
Yeah, just it wasn't anything in particular. It's just sometimes I think when they had the hard matchup against whatever line Kirill was on. Dickinson's line, they were committed to checking. The game was to check for them. So, and they did a good job of it, but then you just get different combos, different feels. And sometimes as a player, you get a different line combo, you get a different guy, it kind of ignites you. It just helps, I think, sometimes mentally it gets guys kind of aware on the bench. It brings some energy. You got to know who you're changing for. And that's at times, that's why you do it.
Most of Boldy's goals are big, meaningful goals, game winners, tying goals. Like, what is it about him that is able to capitalize in those moments and really make it count?
Well, I think he's playing a strong game, and I think when the game's on the line in those situations, or game winners, or a tying goal like tonight, I just think his drive and his intensity is what's he's playing his best in the biggest moments, and that's what you need from guys that get quality ice time and guys that you count on to be big time players for you night in and night out. He's been able to deliver.
That's earned. Like he earns that trust or opportunity from you because he's capitalized on it in the past.
Yeah.
Just given.
Well, no, it's not given, but I think it's he's a guy that can produce at key moments in the game, and he's been able to do that throughout the year, and he continues to do it. Tonight was no different.
Obviously, tough schedule here. To go 3 and 4 and have to leave in the morning yesterday but land at night. These 3 days off, how needed are they right now?
I think they're needed, both mentally and physically. I think, as I said, 5 out of 6 points on the road. It was a grueling road trip. You're going out west. You're playing a back-to-back. You're traveling all day. We didn't get here till about 6 o'clock last night. It's kind of a wasted day. Then you come in and play a 6 o'clock game on top of it. I just really like, even though we didn't get the 2 points, the fact that just the dig-in level of the third period is what we're looking for, and I think that speaks volumes of the commitment of the players, and I think the mental and physical toughness and not giving in when you're stacked up against it. I'm really proud of the team for that.
And let's give some credit to Peter Mrazek too for the Chicago Blackhawks in net. I mean, he, and Chicago didn't allow the Wild a ton in the way of offensive chances, just mustering a 1.68 expected goals against for the entire game, and Mrazek giving up just the 1 goal. So better than expected in that aspect. But I said it yesterday, and so the everydayers are well aware of this fact. I think getting the points is the difference between this year's team and last year's team. I don't think last year's team is able to even get a single point in that game against Chicago because there just was kind of a level of, here we go again, that we saw with the Minnesota Wild pretty much all of last season before John Hynes took over. It's just anytime anything went wrong, there just was kind of this helpless feeling because there was nothing being done to really try to actively switch things up and try to create better matchups or try to create different sorts of looks that throw your opponent off. And here comes John Hynes, and he throws in the line blender, and I'm so glad we got that answer to confirm what we have expected, what we have kind of assumed with why Hynes goes with the line blender periodically, or why we see different combinations at points throughout the game, is he does such a good job of just getting a beat on where everything's at as the game is unfolding and saying, hey, these 3 guys are playing really well. Let's try to get them some additional looks. Like, getting Kirill additional shifts with, especially in that game because of the early penalties, getting Kirill shifts on the third line to get him minutes and to keep him going. These are just things that we did not see under Dean Evison. It was so the opposite, where you get your standard lines, and if things aren't going well, you got to tip your cap to the opponent because they have figured out what we're trying to do, and there's nothing we can do to adjust. So credit to John Hynes. I love the fact that we have incorporated some of these answers more, just to kind of peel back the curtain and to get the rationale as to why he's doing some of the things that he is. I think we're starting to see a little better picture as to how John Hynes coaches when he's behind the bench for the Minnesota Wild. We're going to talk about all of the different combinations that we saw. We'll talk about some of our favorites, but when we come back, we're going to take a look at what have been some dandy numbers for Jonas Brodin and Jared Spurgeon as a D pairing. Wait until you hear where they rank in a couple of key statistical categories. We'll talk about that as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Select Quote. The World Series, the Super Bowl, the Olympics, the world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing: teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. Select Quote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. Select Quote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. And these policies are more affordable than you think. You can get coverage for up to $1 million for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. Go to selectquote.com/lockedonnhl today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure to stay tuned throughout the rest of the week as we get you back on track with games on Thursday. And of course, we got the big tilt against the Dallas Stars on Saturday. We are working on some special guests to help preview that matchup against the Dallas Stars. Oh, by the way, how did they do today? Well, they rocked the Pittsburgh Penguins by a score of 7-1. So big tilts this weekend. We'll have you covered as we do each and every day of the week. I want to take a little time to talk about what we have seen from Jonas Brodin and Jared Spurgeon since they took over as a D pairing. We continue to see Brock Faber and Jake Middleton. Their numbers they're still pretty good, but they obviously have faced a ton of pressure as the season unfolds. But you look at what Jared Spurgeon and Jonas Brodin have done. Folks, in all D pairings in the NHL, that have played a minimum of 50 minutes together, Jonas Brodin and Jared Spurgeon have the lowest expected goals against per 60 minutes of any defensive pairing in the entirety of the NHL at 1.11 goals against per 60 minutes. Let's take a look at what they did against Chicago, because they put it on full display in a game in which both defenses really tried to suffocate the offense. In the 11 minutes, 41 seconds that they played together, Jared Spurgeon and Jonas Brodin allowed only 6 shot attempts against. Only 6. While they were on the ice, the Wild had 17 shot attempts. 4. All told, in the 11 minutes and 41 seconds, 3 shots on goal allowed by those two. That is suffocating levels of defense that those two have put together to deepen this D-core by giving you 2 pairings that are capable of really just putting the clamps down on opponents. And just looking at some of the numbers, we talked about the numbers that Brett Marshall threw out for the second line in yesterday's episode. Listen to these numbers from Spurgeon and Brodin. Jared Spurgeon and Jonas Brodin, since Spurgeon came back from injury on October 29th. They've played 7 games together, 97 minutes, 10 seconds of time on ice in 5-on-5. They have outscored opponents 4-2, so they have allowed 2 goals in 7 games. They've been responsible for 2 goals against in 7 games. A 55-21 shot advantage in that time frame. 21 total shots allowed with those 2 on the ice in the 7 games that they've played. And high danger chances, 19-9. Just 9 high danger chances allowed against Jared Spurgeon and Jonas Brodin in the 7 games that they've played together. Brett also goes one step above, and here are the numbers with those 2 on the bench. In 188 minutes, 52 seconds, the Wild have outscored their opponents 10-6, but they have been outshot 104-90, and they have allowed 36 high danger chances to 34. So they're -6 in high danger chances, but +10 with those 2 on the ice. Folks, we have seen through the first 15 games of the season that this defense is pretty darn good, and it combines with some really good goaltending. And if you're looking for the makings of like what makes a good team, defense, goaltending, and offense. And the Wild have, at this point, they definitely have 2 out of the 3. The offense is always going to be kind of hit or miss. You know, you go through these peaks and valleys, and right now it seems like the offense is a little bit more of a struggle, but trust me, there will be points this season in which it seems like you can't stop scoring. That's just how it works. Everybody gets in a rhythm. Everybody gets in a little bit of a flow. And so the thing that has been really consistent so far this season has been the defense and the goaltending for this Minnesota Wild team. In the 15 games so far this year, look at the number of times that the Wild have allowed more than 3 goals. 1, 2, 3. 3 times. In 15 games, they have allowed more than 3 goals 3 times. Now, they have allowed 3 goals in a couple of other games, but they scored 5 in those games. So that doesn't matter. But it's more than 3 goals is kind of that magic number for this team. And that happened to Seattle, that 5-4 shootout loss. It happened to Philadelphia, the 7-5 loss, and it happened to the Los Angeles Kings in that 5-1 loss. Other than that, It's been 3 or fewer for this Minnesota Wild team. And as much as I raved about the Brodin and Spurgeon numbers, guess who's number 4 in the NHL in terms of expected goals against per 60 minutes? Declan Chisholm and John Merrill. I know we are not thrilled that Johnny Vibes continues to occupy a spot on this roster, but I'm telling you folks, he hasn't, at least analytically, he has not cratered nearly as much as in previous seasons. 1.23 goals, expected goals against per 60 minutes is 4th best in the NHL. So you have those two. You have the early work this season by Brodin and Faber that is still 5th in the NHL at 1.25 expected goals per 60 minutes. The combination of Middleton and Faber is at 1.98 expected goals per 60 minutes, which is 29th in the NHL. But think about this. They're facing a lot of the top opponents. They're facing the top lines of many of the teams that the Wild go up against. And so they're facing the best of the best. And to still have that number under 2 is, I think, is fantastic. They have been responsible for more than a few goals against over the last few games. But just, again, some of these numbers, Chisholm and Merrill have been responsible for 1 goal against on the season. Now, that's in pretty limited time, but Brodin and Spurgeon have been responsible for 2 goals against. That's it. Middleton and Faber have been responsible for 3 goals against. That's it. In 194.3 minutes, just 3 goals against per game. And so if you want to take it a step further to goals against per 60 minutes, actual goals against, Middleton and Faber's 13th in the NHL. Chisholm and Merrill is 16th. Brodin and Spurgeon, 29th. And that's all D pairings with a minimum of 50 minutes of time on ice together. Great work by this Wild D corps so far this season, to say the least. We'll finish today's show by taking a look at all of the different combinations that John Hynes used in the game against Chicago, and we're going to weed out some of the ones that I think were fun, that we should see again at some points this season. We'll talk about all that as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so that your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder on Wednesday night at 8 p.m., as Denny has some thoughts on the Minnesota Wild lineups so far this season, the results. We'll take a look back at his predictions at the start of the year and see which players are close, are on the same pace, are a little below. We'll see who's shattering their expected pace so far this season. I'll give you a hint. Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Boldy. We'll talk about all that Wednesday night at 8 p.m. So join us for all of the fun right here on Locked On Wild. Speaking of fun, we saw our first instance of Dr. Frankenheinz as the lines just were blended up beyond recognition. Although, as Hynes mentioned, Jakub Lauko, Murat Huznadinov, and Yakov Trenin played pretty darn good. They out-attempted Chicago 11-4 while they were on the ice. And so, as Hynes alluded to, he kept that group together. Now, it was a rough go for Kaprizov, Rossi, and Zuccarello because, as he mentioned, Chicago was trying to be physical with those guys. And so the overlying metrics for Kaprizov, Rossi, and Zuccarello, not great. They were outshot 5-3 while they were on the ice. And, the Corsi numbers, not great. The expected goals, not great. But we got to talk about some of these other combinations because for 2 minutes and 24 seconds, we did see Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Zuccarello, and center Matt Boldy. And in the 2 minutes, 24 seconds that combination was on the ice, they scored the only goal that the Minnesota Wild had against Chicago, and they threw the Blackhawks for such a loop that Chicago did not manage a shot attempt against that combination while they were out on the ice. Kaprizov, Boldy, Zuccarello out-attempted Chicago 5-0 while they were on the ice. Some of the other combinations that we saw included Foligno, Rossi, and Hartman. Numbers for that group, they did a good job too in the shot attempts against. Really out-attempted Chicago 4-1 in the 1 minute 52 seconds that combination got some time together. I want to take a look at the Boldy, Eriksson Ek, Johansson numbers because in the 4 minutes and 40 seconds that combination was together, they out-attempted Chicago 6-2. The numbers continue to back that trio in terms of just strong underlying metrics, but I continue to just not really see it match up with what we see on the ice. And so I just continue to just be kind of like 2/3 of that is great, but the other third is just, I still really am not, super thrilled that we continue to see that. So not only did we see Kaprizov, Boldy, Zuccarello, we also got a little bit of a look at Johansson, Gaudreau, and Zuccarello. They out-attempted the Blackhawks 3-0. We got another look at Boldy, Eriksson Ek, and Kaprizov. They had a couple of shot attempts for, nothing against. The one line that did allow a goal was Marcus Johansson, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matt Zuccarello. And that combination, I don't like it. I guess I don't hate it, but that also meant that we did get a little bit of Kirill, Matt Boldy, and Marco Rossi. And so let's just go down the list of the combinations that I think bear keeping an eye on and bear keeping in the back pocket for some time down the line. You never know with injuries who you are going to need to replace in the lineup. And so let's file away Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Boldy, and Matt Zuccarello for a rainy day, because Matt Boldy has shown that he is capable of winning faceoffs here and there. He is at 55.9% in the faceoff circle so far this year, albeit in a small amount of attempts. He's 19 out of 34. So not a ton in the way of actual faceoff attempts, but he can certainly step in and win a faceoff. Also, of course, Kaprizov, Eriksson Ek, and Boldy. You file that one away. You file away Kaprizov, Rossi, Boldy. As another one that I think shows some promise. And beyond that, this is one too. I'm probably going to get an eye roll for suggesting this, but this was used in the game. I think it was the game against Toronto. Kaprizov, Gaudreau, and Zuccarello. Now, hear me out on this, because Freddie, I think it's safe to say his performance has improved substantially this year. He's winning faceoffs. He's on a point bender right now. He's got 8 points now in, I think, the last 7 games. He's got 2 goals, 6 assists in 15 games. He's well on his way to eclipsing both goals and points that he had last year, which was 5 goals and 15 total points. He is well on his way to besting that this season. And so you never know if something happens to Joel Eriksson during a game, or if Rossi's injured. You might need to have somebody step in an absolute pinch and be able to provide a little something to just help out with Kaprizov and Zuccarello. Beyond that, there were just a lot of this is an interesting kind of a look. One that I think was just interesting because of the names associated: Kaprizov, Eriksson, and Hartman. Will we see that at some point this year? Probably not. But again, it just I think the thing that I like is that you use something like 20 different line combinations. And I know some of these were just a player, is coming in and the rest of the line isn't able to change. But as John Hynes said, a lot of times he does this just to see if you can get other players going by, giving them just a little bit of a surge mentally to, okay, I got to really be on my A game here because Kirill's coming into play on this line, or I got to be ready to rock with this face-off because I'm going to be with Matt Boldy on this shift. I think it just helps kind of show that you are really trying to go for the game, and we wouldn't have seen even a third of these line combinations if Dean was coaching in that game against Chicago. You would have seen the same 4, maybe a couple of other just spare parts lines, but file some of those away. I was very intrigued by Kaprizov, Boldy, Zuccarello, and that might be something too. If you are late in a game and you absolutely need to get a goal, don't be surprised if you see that, just to try to make something happen. But we'll keep an eye on all those combinations, and we'll see what happens, because it was mentioned after the game that Jonas Brodin is, as we talked about with Alex yesterday, Jonas Brodin may be a little banged up at the end of the game against Chicago. That bears monitoring, of course, but didn't hear anything other than that. So we'll see. Thankfully, the Wild have a few days off before they play Montreal. So we should get a better idea as to what's going on with Brodin before Thursday's game against the Canadiens. We'll keep an eye on everything, and we'll let you know if there are any injuries or any lineup changes ahead of that game. But thanks for tuning into today's episode. Make sure to hit the like button so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.